It's strange to think that the world could come to the very edge of disaster, teetering on the brink of oblivion, and yet almost no one would realize it until it was too late. But history is full of moments like this. Moments when fate hung by a thread, when the ordinary routines of daily life masked the extraordinary danger lurking just out of sight. This is the story of one such day, a day when the world almost ended and nobody noticed. Imagine waking up on an ordinary morning. The sun rises, the birds sing, and people go about their business as usual. There's coffee brewing in kitchens, children getting ready for school, and workers hurrying to catch the bus. The world feels safe, predictable, and familiar. But beneath the surface, something is happening. Something that could change everything in an instant. Our story begins not with a bang, but with a whisper. It starts in a control room, deep underground, where a handful of people are monitoring blinking lights and humming machines. They are scientists, engineers, and military personnel, each focused on their screens, each playing their part in a vast, invisible drama. The year's 1983, and the world is in the grip of the Cold War. Tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union are at an all-time high. Both sides have enough nuclear weapons to destroy the planet many times over, and the threat of annihilation hangs over everyone like a shadow. But on this particular day, most people are blissfully unaware of just how close they are to disaster. They don't know that a single mistake, a single miscalculation, could set off a chain reaction that would end life as we know it. They don't know that in a bunker outside Moscow, a man named Stanislav Petrov is about to make a decision that will determine the fate of the world. Petrov is a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Air Defense Forces. His job is to monitor the early warning system for signs of a nuclear attack. It's a job that requires nerves of steel and a cool head under pressure. On the night of September 26, 1983, Petrov is at his post watching the screens when suddenly an alarm goes off. The computer is telling him that the United States has launched 5 nuclear missiles at the Soviet Union. The room erupts into chaos. Sirens blare, lights flash, and the weight of the world seems to press down on everyone present. The protocol is clear. If the system detects an incoming attack, the Soviet Union must retaliate immediately. There is no time to double-check, no time to hesitate. The fate of millions hangs in the balance. But Petrov hesitates. Something doesn't feel right. The system is new, untested, and prone to glitches. Why would the United States launch only 5 missiles? If they were going to start a nuclear war, wouldn't they launch everything they had? Petrov's mind races as he weighs the evidence. The pressure is immense. If he's wrong, the Soviet Union could be destroyed. If he's right, he could prevent a catastrophe. He makes a decision. He tells his superiors that it's a false alarm. He refuses to report the incoming missiles as a real attack. Minutes pass. The tension is unbearable. And then nothing happens. No missiles arrive. The world keeps turning. The crisis is averted and almost no one ever knows how close they came to the end. This is just one example of how the world can come to the brink of disaster without anyone realizing it. There are countless other moments in history when fate hung by a thread, when the actions of a single person made all the difference. Sometimes these moments are lost to time, forgotten in the rush of daily life. But if we look closely, we can see the patterns, the hidden dangers, the near misses, the close calls that shape our world. As we move through this story, we'll explore other days when the world almost ended. We'll look at the Cuban Missile Crisis, the false alarms, the misunderstandings, and the accidents that could have changed everything. We'll meet the people who stood at the crossroads of history, who made decisions under unimaginable pressure, and who, in their own quiet way, saved the world. But before we go any further, let's pause and consider what it means to live in a world where disaster can strike at any moment. How do we cope with the knowledge that our lives are so fragile, so dependent on the choices of others? How do we find meaning and purpose in a world that can change in an instant? Perhaps the answer lies in the stories we tell. By remembering the close calls, by honoring the people who made the right choices, we remind ourselves that history isn't just a series of random events. It's a tapestry woven from the actions of individuals, people like Stanislav Petrov, who chose to trust their instincts, to question the obvious, and to act with courage in the face of uncertainty. As you listen to this story, I invite you to imagine yourself in Petrov's shoes. What would you have done? Would you have had the courage to go against the system, to risk everything on a hunch? Or would you have followed orders, trusting the machines over your own judgment? These are not easy questions, but they are worth asking.
Because in the end, the day the world almost ended is not just a story about the past. It's a reminder that our future depends on the choices we make today. It's a call to pay attention, to stay curious, and to never take the ordinary for granted. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary moments happen when nobody is watching. As the world slept through that fateful night in 1983, the weight of what could have been remained invisible to almost everyone. The sun rose as usual, casting its golden light over cities and countrysides, over people who had no idea how close they had come to never seeing another dawn. In Moscow, the streets bustled with the usual morning traffic. In New York, commuters hurried through subway stations, clutching coffee and newspapers. Life went on, oblivious to the silent heroism that had just saved it. But what if things had gone differently? What if Stanislav Petrov had followed protocol, trusted the blinking lights and blaring sirens, and reported the attack as real? The Soviet leadership, already on edge, might have launched a full-scale nuclear retaliation. Missiles would have streaked across the sky, arcing over continents, carrying with them the power to erase entire cities in a flash. The world as we know it would have ended, not with a slow decline, but with a sudden, blinding burst of light. It's almost impossible to imagine the scale of destruction that would have followed. In the first few minutes, millions would have perished. The survivors would have faced a world transformed by fire and radiation, a landscape of ruins and ash. The global climate would have shifted, crops would have failed, and famine would have spread across continents. Civilization itself might not have survived. And all of it would have happened because of a single, simple mistake, a computer glitch, a misread signal, a moment of panic. This is the terrifying power of the nuclear age. For decades, the world has lived under the shadow of mutually assured destruction, a doctrine that promises total annihilation if either side dares to strike first. It's a delicate balance maintained by technology, vigilance, and sometimes sheer luck. The story of Stanislav Petrov is a reminder that for all our machines and systems, the fate of the world can still rest in the hands of a single human being. But Petrov's story is not unique. Throughout history, there have been other moments when disaster loomed just out of sight, when the world came within a hair's breadth of catastrophe. Some of these moments are well known, like the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, when the United States and the Soviet Union stood on the brink of nuclear war over missiles in Cuba. For 13 days, the world held its breath as leaders on both sides weighed their options, searching for a way to step back from the edge. But even during the Cuban Missile Crisis, most people went about their lives as usual. They read the headlines, worried about the future, but few truly understood how close they were to the end. In secret meetings and tense phone calls, President JFK Kennedy and Premier Nikita Khrushchev negotiated, bluffed, and bargained. Behind the scenes, military commanders prepared for the worst, ready to launch their weapons at a moment's notice. And yet, through a combination of diplomacy, caution, and luck, disaster was averted. There's a strange comfort in the idea that history is shaped by great leaders and dramatic events. But the truth is often more complicated. Sometimes it's the quiet moments, the unnoticed decisions, that make all the difference. A technician who double-checks a reading, a commander who hesitates before giving an order, a diplomat who chooses to listen instead of shout. These are the moments that shape our world, even if they never make the headlines. As we look back on these near misses and close calls, it's easy to feel a sense of unease. How many other disasters have we narrowly avoided without ever knowing it? How many times has the world come close to ending, only to be saved by chance or the actions of an unsung hero? The answers are unsettling, but they also offer hope. Because if disaster can be averted by a single person's courage or wisdom, then perhaps our future is not as fragile as it seems. Let's return to that control room outside Moscow, to the moment when Stanislav Petrov made his fateful decision. Imagine the tension in the air, the sweat on his brow, the pounding of his heart. He knows that the world is watching, even if it doesn't realize it. He knows that his choice will echo through history, even if no one ever learns his name. In that moment, he is utterly alone, responsible for the fate of millions. And yet he chooses to trust his instincts. He remembers the flaws in the system, the times when the alarms have sounded for no reason. He questions the logic of the attack. Why only 5 missiles, not a full-scale assault? He weighs the evidence, considers the consequences, and makes his call. It's a decision that requires not just intelligence, but courage. The courage to stand against the tide, to risk everything on a hunch. In the years that followed, Petrov's actions remained a secret. He was neither celebrated nor condemned. He returned to his quiet life, carrying the burden of what might have been. It was only decades later that the world learned the truth, that historians pieced together the story of the day the world almost ended. By then, Petrov was an old man, living in obscurity, his moment of heroism all but forgotten. But his story endures, a testament to the power of individual action in the face of overwhelming odds. It reminds us that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry woven from the choices of ordinary people. It challenges us to pay attention, to question the obvious, to act with courage when it matters most. As we continue our journey through the hidden history of near misses and close calls, let's keep this lesson in mind. The world is more fragile than we like to admit, but it is also more resilient. For every disaster narrowly avoided, there is a story of hope, of courage, of human ingenuity. And sometimes, the greatest heroes are the ones we never notice.
The story of Stanislav Petrov is just the beginning. To truly understand how close the world has come to disaster, we need to look beyond the headlines and official histories to the hidden moments when fate hung in the balance. These are the stories that rarely make it into textbooks, the stories that unfold in the shadows, in quiet rooms and lonely corridors, far from the eyes of the public. Yet they are the stories that have shaped our world in ways we can barely imagine. Consider, for example, the events of November 9, 1979. In the United States, military officials at the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, were jolted awake by a terrifying message. Their computers were showing a massive Soviet missile attack in progress. The screens lit up with warnings, and the protocols for nuclear retaliation began to unfold. Within minutes, bombers were scrambled, missile crews were put on high alert, and the president's emergency command post was notified. The world was, once again, on the brink. But something didn't add up. The data seemed too perfect, too clean, almost as if it had been scripted. A few quick-thinking officers decided to double-check the information. They reached out to radar stations and satellite feeds, searching for any sign of actual missiles in the air. Nothing. No blips, no launches, no evidence of an attack. It turned out that a training tape, a simulation of a Soviet attack, had been accidentally loaded into the live warning system. The world had come within minutes of nuclear war because of a simple human error. This incident, like so many others, was quietly swept under the rug. The public never knew how close they had come to disaster. The officials involved were praised for their calm under pressure, but the system itself remained as fragile as ever. The lesson was clear. Even the most advanced technology is only as reliable as the people who operate it. And sometimes, all it takes is a single mistake to bring the world to the edge. These stories are not just relics of the past. Even today, the systems that guard against nuclear war are far from foolproof. False alarms, technical glitches, and human errors continue to pose a threat. In 1995, for example, Russian radar operators detected what appeared to be an incoming missile from Norway. The Russian military went on high alert, and the nuclear briefcase, the so-called Cheget, was brought to President Boris Yeltsin. For the first time in history, a Russian leader activated the nuclear codes, preparing to launch a retaliatory strike. But, once again, cooler heads prevailed. The missile turned out to be a scientific rocket launched by Norwegian and American researchers to study the Northern Lights. The notification of the launch had been sent to Russian authorities, but it had gotten lost in the bureaucracy. Disaster was averted by minutes thanks to a combination of luck and restraint. What these stories reveal is a world that is far more precarious than we like to believe. We trust in systems and protocols, in the wisdom of our leaders and the reliability of our machines, but beneath the surface, chaos lurks. The line between peace and destruction is razor thin, maintained by vigilance, luck, and the courage of individuals who are willing to question, to hesitate, to think twice. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of such overwhelming danger. After all, what can one person do in a world where the fate of millions can be decided by a computer glitch or a bureaucratic oversight? But the stories of Petrov, of the NORAD officers, of President Yeltsin remind us that individuals do matter, that even in the most impersonal, high-stakes situations, human judgment can make all the difference. Let's pause for a moment and imagine what it must have felt like to be in those rooms, to hold the fate of the world in your hands. The pressure, the fear, the uncertainty, the knowledge that a single decision could mean life or death for millions. It's a burden that few of us can truly comprehend. And yet, time and again, ordinary people have risen to the challenge, choosing caution over panic, reason over fear. These stories also force us to confront uncomfortable truths about the systems we rely on. For all our technological progress, for all our advances in science and engineering, we are still vulnerable to the same old problems: miscommunication, human error, and the unpredictability of chance. The world is not as stable as it seems. The routines of daily life, the sense of safety and normalcy, are built on a foundation that is far more fragile than we care to admit. But perhaps that is also a source of hope. If disaster can be averted by a single act of courage or wisdom, then perhaps we are not as powerless as we think. Perhaps the future is not written in stone, but shaped by the choices we make, day after day, moment by moment. As we move forward in the story, let's remember the lessons of these near misses. Let's honor the people who made the right choices, who trusted their instincts, who dared to question the obvious. And let's ask ourselves what we can do in our own lives to make the world a little safer, a little more resilient. Because the day the world almost ended is not just a story about the past. It's a warning and a challenge and a call to action. It's a reminder that history is not just something that happens to us, but something we create together every day. As we reflect on these moments when the world teetered on the edge, it's important to recognize how invisible these dangers often are. The people living through them rarely sense the gravity of what's unfolding. The world keeps spinning, the news cycles churn, and the vast majority of humanity remains blissfully unaware of the razor's edge on which their lives balance. This is the paradox of existential risk. The closer we come to catastrophe, the less likely we are to notice, until it's too late.
Let's step back for a moment and consider the psychology of these near misses. Why do they remain hidden from public consciousness? Part of the answer lies in the nature of the threats themselves. Nuclear war, for example, is a possibility that exists in the background, a shadow that looms over international relations but rarely intrudes into daily life. It's abstract, distant, and difficult to imagine. The systems designed to prevent disaster are secretive by necessity, shrouded in layers of security and bureaucracy. The people who operate them are trained to be invisible, to do their jobs without fanfare or recognition. But there's another reason these stories remain untold. They challenge our sense of control. We like to believe that the world is orderly, that disasters are rare and predictable, that someone, somewhere, is in charge. The reality is far messier. The world is full of uncertainty,
and the systems we rely on are often more fragile than we realize. When we learn about close calls like the ones we've discussed, it forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that our safety is not guaranteed. This discomfort is one reason why stories like Stanislav Petrov's are so powerful. They remind us that, for all our technology and planning, the fate of the world can still hinge on the judgment of a single person. They force us to acknowledge the limits of our control and to appreciate the courage and wisdom of those who make the right choices under pressure. But there's another reason these stories remain untold. They offer a kind of reassurance. They show us that, even in the darkest moments, there is hope, that individuals can make a difference, that reason can triumph over fear, that disaster is not inevitable. They remind us that history is not just a series of accidents, but a record of choices, some wise, some foolish, all deeply human. Let's explore another near miss, one that unfolded not in the Cold War era, but in the digital age. In 2010, a computer glitch at the United States Air Force's F.E. Warren Base in Wyoming caused the loss of communication with 50 intercontinental ballistic missiles. For nearly an hour, the crews responsible for these weapons were unable to monitor or control them. The cause? A single piece of malfunctioning hardware. The incident was quickly resolved, and the public was reassured that there was never any real danger. But the truth is more complicated. Had the glitch occurred during a period of heightened tension, it could have been misinterpreted as an attack or sabotage, triggering a catastrophic response. This incident highlights a new dimension of existential risk, the vulnerability of our technological systems. As our world becomes more interconnected, the potential for accidents, errors, and cyber attacks increases. The systems that keep us safe are only as strong as their weakest link, and sometimes that link is frighteningly fragile. It's easy to dismiss these risks as remote or unlikely. After all, the world has survived so far. But history teaches us that complacency is dangerous. The more we take our safety for granted, the more vulnerable we become. The stories of near misses are not just cautionary tales. They are reminders to stay vigilant, to question assumptions, to prepare for the unexpected. As we move through this narrative, let's not lose sight of the ordinary people at the heart of these extraordinary events. The technicians, the officers, the scientists, the diplomats, each playing their part in a drama that unfolds behind closed doors. Their stories are rarely told, but they are the true guardians of our future. Imagine for a moment the weight of responsibility these individuals carry, the knowledge that a single mistake could unleash unimaginable destruction, the pressure to make the right call, often with incomplete information and little time to think. It's a burden that few of us can truly understand, but one that deserves our respect and gratitude. Yet, for every story of heroism, there are also stories of failure, moments when the system broke down, when luck ran out, when disaster was only narrowly averted. In 1961, for example, a B-52 bomber carrying 2 nuclear bombs broke apart over Goldsboro, North Carolina. One of the bombs came perilously close to detonating. Only one single low-voltage switch prevented a nuclear explosion that would have devastated the region. The incident was kept secret for decades. Another near miss, hidden from public view. These stories are sobering, but they also serve as a call to action. They remind us that the work of keeping the world safe is never finished, that vigilance, humility, and a willingness to learn from past mistakes are essential, that the greatest threats are often the ones we never see coming. As we continue to explore the hidden history of near misses, let's remember that the line between disaster and survival is often thinner than we think, that the world can come to the brink of oblivion without anyone noticing until the danger has passed, and that in the end, it is up to all of us to pay attention, to ask questions, and to never take our safety for granted. The world's brush with oblivion is not limited to the nuclear age or the Cold War. Throughout history, humanity has faced moments when disaster
Consider, for example, the rise of artificial intelligence and autonomous weapons. These technologies promise to revolutionize warfare, making it faster, more precise, and less dependent on human decision-making. But they also raise new and troubling questions. What happens if an AI system misinterprets a signal or is hacked by a hostile actor? What if a machine, programmed to respond to threats, decides that the safest course of action is to strike first? The line between safety and catastrophe becomes even thinner, and the margin for error shrinks. The same is true of our global infrastructure. The power grids, communication networks, and transportation systems that underpin modern life are marvels of engineering, but they are also vulnerable to disruption. A single cyber attack, a natural disaster, or a technical failure can cascade through these systems, causing chaos on a scale that is hard to imagine. The world is more connected than ever, but that connectivity comes at a price. Yet, for all these dangers, there is also reason for hope. The stories of near misses and close calls are not just tales of disaster narrowly averted, they are also stories of resilience, adaptation, and learning. Each time the world comes close to the edge, we gain new knowledge, new tools, and new ways of thinking about risk. We learn from our mistakes, and we find ways to make our systems stronger, our responses quicker, our judgments wiser. This process is not always smooth or easy. It requires humility, a willingness to admit when things go wrong, and a commitment to transparency and accountability. It requires us to look beyond the surface, to question our assumptions, and to prepare for the unexpected. But it is also a source of strength, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming danger, we are not powerless. Let's not forget the role of ordinary people in this story. The technicians who spot a glitch in the system, the officers who double-check a warning, the scientists who raise the alarm about a new threat, these are the unsung heroes of our age. Their vigilance, their skepticism, and their courage are the last line of defense against disaster. They remind us that for all our technology, it is still human judgment that matters most. As we look to the future, it is tempting to focus on the threats that loom on the horizon. Climate change, pandemics, cyber warfare, and artificial intelligence are all real and serious dangers. But they are not inevitable. The future is not a fixed path, but a landscape of possibilities. The choices we make today will shape the world of tomorrow. So what can we do as individuals to make a difference? The answer is both simple and profound. We can pay attention. We can ask questions. We can refuse to accept easy answers or comforting illusions. We can support those who work to keep us safe, and we can demand accountability from those in power. We can remember that history is not just something that happens to us, but something we create together every day. The day the world almost ended is not just a story about the past. It is a warning and a challenge and a call to action. It is a reminder that the line between disaster and survival is often thinner than we think, and that the fate of the world can rest in the hands of a single person. It is a story of fragility, but also of resilience, of danger, but also of hope. The idea that the world can come so close to disaster without anyone noticing is both haunting and strangely comforting. It's haunting because it reveals just how fragile our existence can be, how easily the routines of daily life can be shattered by forces beyond our control. But it's also comforting, in a way, because it shows that disaster is not inevitable. Time and time again, the world has come to the brink, and time again, it has pulled back, often thanks to the quiet courage and clear thinking of individuals who refused to panic. Let's explore another moment when the world almost changed forever, yet most people remained blissfully unaware. In 1962, during the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Soviet submarine known as B-59 found itself surrounded by American warships in the Caribbean Sea.
The Americans, unaware that the submarine was armed with a nuclear torpedo, began dropping practice depth charges to force it to surface. Inside the submarine, conditions were dire. The crew was exhausted, the air was running out, and the captain believed that war might have already begun. The protocol for launching the nuclear torpedo required the agreement of 3 officers. 2 were ready to authorize the launch, convinced that they were under attack, but the third, Vasily Arkhipov, refused. He argued for restraint, insisting that they surface and await orders from Moscow. His calm under pressure, his willingness to question the prevailing mood, prevented what could have been the start of World War III. The submarine surfaced, the crisis passed, and the world continued on, unaware of how close it had come to destruction. Archipov's story is a powerful reminder that history is shaped not just by leaders and generals, but by ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. His decision, made in the cramped, stifling heat of a submarine, may have saved millions of lives. Yet for decades, his role remained unknown, his heroism unrecognized. It's a pattern we see again and again. The people who save the world are often the ones we never hear about. These stories challenge our assumptions about how history works. We like to imagine that the fate of nations is decided in grand halls and on battlefields by presidents and prime ministers, but more often it is decided in quiet moments by individuals who choose caution over aggression, reason over fear. The world is not just shaped by the powerful, but by the wise, the skeptical, the brave.
As we reflect on these hidden histories, it's worth asking why they remain so obscure. Part of the answer lies in the nature of the events themselves. Near misses are, by definition, events that didn't happen. There are no dramatic explosions, no cities reduced to rubble, no clear villains or heroes. The danger passes, life goes on, and the story fades into the background. But perhaps there is another reason. These stories force us to confront the limits of our control, to acknowledge that the world is more unpredictable than we like to admit. This unpredictability is not just a feature of the past, it is a constant presence in our lives, a reminder that the future is always uncertain. The systems we build to keep us safe, whether they are military alliances, public health networks, or technological safeguards, are never perfect. They are always vulnerable to error, to misunderstanding, to the unpredictable quirks of fate. Yet, for all this uncertainty, there is also a deep resilience in the human spirit. Time and again, people have risen to the challenge, adapting to new dangers, learning from past mistakes, and finding ways to survive. The story of the day the world almost ended is not just a story of fragility, but of strength. It is a testament to the power of human ingenuity, cooperation, and courage. Let's not forget the role of luck in these stories. Sometimes disaster is averted not by wisdom or planning, but by sheer chance. A bomb fails to detonate, a message is delayed, a storm disrupts a military exercise. These moments of luck are a reminder that, for all our efforts to control the world, there is always an element of unpredictability. But luck alone is not enough. It is the combination of luck and judgment, of chance and choice, that shapes our destiny. As we look to the future, it is tempting to focus on the threats that seem most immediate: political conflict, economic instability, environmental crisis. But the greatest dangers are often the ones we don't see coming, the silent risks, the hidden vulnerabilities, the moments when the world almost ends and nobody notices. The lesson of history is not to live in fear, but to remain vigilant, to question our assumptions, and to prepare for the unexpected. So what can we learn from these stories? First, that the world is more fragile than we think, but also more resilient. Second, that individuals matter, that the choices we make, even in the most ordinary moments, can have extraordinary consequences. And third, that history is not just a record of what happened, but a map of what might have been. As you listen to these stories, remember that you are part of this history. Your actions, your choices, your willingness to pay attention and ask questions, all of these matter. The world is full of hidden dangers, but it is also full of hidden heroes. And sometimes the greatest acts of courage are the ones that go unnoticed. The stories of near misses and unnoticed disasters are not just tales of the past, they are warnings for the present and the future. As our world grows more complex, the potential for hidden dangers increases. The systems that keep us safe are more intricate than ever, and the consequences of failure are more severe. But the lessons of history remain the same. Vigilance, humility, and the courage to question are our best defenses against catastrophe. Let's consider a more recent example, one that unfolded in the digital age. In 2016, a massive cyber attack known as the Mirai botnet swept across the internet, hijacking hundreds of thousands of devices and using them to launch attacks on major websites and infrastructure. For a few hours, large parts of the internet were inaccessible, and the world caught a glimpse of how vulnerable our digital systems really are. The attack was eventually traced to a group of young hackers, but the incident raised troubling questions about the security of the networks that underpin modern life. What if the attack had targeted critical infrastructure, power grids, water supplies, transportation systems? What if it had been coordinated with other forms of disruption or used as a cover for a more serious assault? The potential for chaos was enormous, yet most people experienced the event as a minor inconvenience, a few hours without their favorite websites, a brief interruption in the flow of information. The world almost changed, and hardly anyone noticed. This is the nature of modern risk. The threats we face are often invisible, hidden in the code of our machines, the complexity of our systems, the interconnections that bind us together. A single vulnerability exploited at the right moment can have consequences that ripple across the globe. Yet because these dangers are abstract and technical, they rarely capture the public's imagination. We worry about the things we can see, storms, fires, wars, but the greatest risks are often the ones we cannot. The same is true of public health. The COVID-19 pandemic was a stark reminder of how quickly the world can change, how a microscopic virus can upend economies, societies, and lives. Yet, even as the pandemic unfolded, there were countless moments when disaster was narrowly averted, when scientists, doctors, and public health officials made decisions that saved lives, often without recognition or thanks. The world saw the headlines, but the true story was written in laboratories, hospitals, and quiet acts of care and courage. These stories are not meant to frighten, but to illuminate. They show us that the world is full of hidden dangers, but also hidden strengths. The systems we rely on are vulnerable, but they are also adaptable. The people who guard our future are fallible, but they are also capable of extraordinary resilience and ingenuity. As we look to the future, the challenges we face will only grow more complex. Climate change threatens to disrupt weather patterns, food supplies, and entire ecosystems. Advances in biotechnology raise the possibility of new diseases, engineered viruses, and unintended consequences. The rise of artificial intelligence and automation brings both promise and peril as machines take on roles once reserved for humans. In this world of uncertainty, the lessons of the past are more important than ever. We must remain vigilant, questioning our assumptions and preparing for the unexpected. We must support those who work to keep us safe, from scientists and engineers to public servants and first responders. And we must remember that, in the end, it is human judgment, our ability to think, to adapt, to care, that will determine our fate. Let's return for a moment to the ordinary people at the heart of these extraordinary stories. The technician who spots a flaw in the system, the officer who hesitates before giving an order, the scientist who raises the alarm about a new threat. These are the true heroes of our age. Their stories are rarely told, but they are the ones who stand between us and disaster. Imagine for a moment the weight of responsibility these individuals carry, the knowledge that a single mistake could unleash chaos, that a moment's hesitation could save or doom millions. It is a burden that few of us can truly understand, but one that deserves our respect and gratitude. Yet, for every story of heroism, there are also stories of failure, moments when the system broke down, when luck ran out, when disaster was only narrowly averted. In 2003, for example, a massive blackout swept across the northeastern United States and Canada, leaving 50 million people without power. The cause? A software bug in an alarm system, combined with a series of human errors. The blackout lasted for days, disrupting lives and economies, but it could have been much worse. Hospitals, water systems, and emergency services were pushed to the brink, and only quick thinking and cooperation prevented a larger catastrophe. These stories are sobering, but they also serve as a call to action. They remind us that the work of keeping the world safe is never finished, that vigilance, humility, and a willingness to learn from past mistakes are essential, that the greatest threats are often the ones we never see coming. As we continue to explore the hidden history of near misses and close calls, let's remember that the line between disaster and survival is often thinner than we think, that the world can come to the brink of destruction without anyone noticing, and that in the end, it is up to all of us to pay attention, to ask questions, and to never take our safety for granted. As we draw closer to the present, the stories of near misses and unnoticed dangers become even more relevant. The pace of change in our world is accelerating, and with it, the complexity of the systems we depend on. The risks we face are no longer confined to the realm of geopolitics or natural disasters. They are woven into the very fabric of our daily lives, hidden in the networks and technologies that connect us all. Consider the global financial system. In 2008, the world came perilously close to economic collapse. The failure of a handful of financial institutions triggered a cascade of panic and uncertainty, threatening to bring down the entire global economy. For a few tense weeks, the future of millions hung in the balance. Governments and central banks scrambled to respond, injecting trillions of dollars into the system to prevent a total meltdown. The crisis was eventually contained, but the scars remain. Many lost their homes, their jobs, their sense of security. Yet, for most people, the true scale of the danger was invisible. The world almost changed forever, and only a handful of experts truly understood how close we came to disaster. This pattern is not unique to finance. In every field, from energy to transportation to healthcare, the systems we rely on are vulnerable to failure. A single point of weakness, a software bug, a supply chain disruption, a miscommunication, can have consequences that ripple across the globe. The more interconnected we become, the greater the potential for cascading failures, and the harder it is to predict where the next crisis will emerge. Yet for all these dangers, there is also a remarkable capacity for adaptation and resilience. The financial crisis of 2008 led to sweeping reforms, new regulations, and a renewed focus on risk management. Engineers and scientists worked tirelessly to identify vulnerabilities, to build redundancies, to prepare for the unexpected. The story of the day the world almost ended is not just a story of fragility, but of learning and growth. Let's not forget the role of communication in these stories. In a world where information travels at the speed of light, the ability to share knowledge, to warn of danger, to coordinate responses is more important than ever. During the 2003 SARS outbreak, for example, the rapid exchange of information between scientists and public health officials helped to contain the virus before it could become a global pandemic. And the aftermath of the 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster, international cooperation and transparency were essential in managing the crisis and preventing further harm. But communication is a double-edged sword. Misinformation, panic, and rumor can spread just as quickly as facts, undermining trust and making it harder to respond effectively. The COVID-19 pandemic revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of our information networks.
Accurate, timely data saved lives, but conspiracy theories and falsehoods sowed confusion and fear. The challenge of the future will be to harness the power of communication for good while guarding against its potential to do harm. As we look ahead, the risks we face will continue to evolve. Climate change is already reshaping the world, bringing new dangers and uncertainties. Extreme weather events, rising sea levels, and shifting ecosystems threaten to disrupt lives and livelihoods on a global scale. The potential for conflict over resources, water, food, energy, will only grow. Yet, even as these dangers mount, there is hope. Advances in science and technology offer new tools for adaptation and mitigation. International cooperation, though often difficult, remains possible.
The lesson of history is clear. The world is full of hidden dangers, but also hidden strengths. The systems we build are vulnerable, but they are also adaptable. The people who guard our future are fallible, but they are also capable of extraordinary resilience and ingenuity. The line between disaster and survival is thin, but it is not impassable. So what can we do, as individuals and as a society, to make the world safer? The answer begins with awareness. We must pay attention to the systems that shape our lives, to the risks that lurk beneath the surface. We must support those who work to keep us safe, from scientists and engineers to public servants and first responders. We must demand transparency and accountability from those in power, and we must be willing to learn from our mistakes. But awareness is not enough. We must also cultivate a spirit of humility, a recognition that we do not have all the answers, that the world is more complex than we can ever fully understand. We must be willing to question our assumptions, to listen to dissenting voices, to adapt in the face of new information. The greatest dangers are often the ones we never see coming, and the greatest strength is the ability to learn and change. As we continue our journey through the hidden history of near misses and close calls, let's remember that the fate of the world is not fixed. It is shaped by the choices we make, by the courage we show, by the questions we ask. The world can come to the brink of disaster without anyone noticing, but it can also be saved by the quiet heroism of ordinary people. As we approach